All right, and welcome to the show. This is the Weekly Jargon, and I'm Jose Rodriguez.
And Rohi Zachariah.
And today, Rohi, we're absent Abel, but Abel will make it out. I think he's out on vacation. So wherever you're at, Abel, have fun. We'll look forward to seeing you next week. It's a new year, and we've been kind of absent a bit here. I know we've our last show we had was several weeks back, but
We had training last
a
week.
lot has happened since
Yeah.
there. So let's go ahead and first of all, let me go ahead and congratulate the latest appointee to the Madera City Council. This
Thank
is
you.
Rohi Zachariah. So congratulations, Rohi.
Thank you.
Anything you want to add to that?
I'm not going to give away my whole speech for next week, but it's exciting. I mean, I think it's been well received, and the community people that I have talked to seem really excited. So I do appreciate it.
Well, good. We won't get into any
Yeah.
city business today. We'll talk about maybe current events, but again, we just wanted to congratulate you. I know you've kind of worked your way up there from a planning commissioner and now at the city council here to make decisions.
Yeah.
And you know, some folks may think that there may be somewhat of a partnership here, but I beg to differ. You and I certainly don't see eye to eye on a lot of things.
No,
I
and
know
I always like that comment. That's why I always plug the show and say, well, you should go watch our show a little bit, because I would think you would disagree with that statement pretty quick. So
Yeah, I think we may share some conservative views, but I think
Yeah.
in many cases we certainly don't agree on a lot of things here. So anyways, it's going to be a good balance. Glad to see that someone from a business sector is coming on and certainly can help and balance our board. But look forward to working with you there, Rohi. Meanwhile, we have a show that we want to talk about,
Yeah.
the latest current events. Obviously, we have a new president now that's been inaugurated, and
Yeah.
he's ready to roll. A lot of executive orders, a lot of different things going on. You're hearing a lot of stuff from Elon Musk. Don't know if he's a vice president or not, but he's out there certainly
yeah.
making a stand and making all these changes. So your thoughts on that? I know we'll get into our topic here
Yeah.
shortly.
I mean, you know, because it's funny, you know, if you come to my shop, my dad, who's very proud of it, has a giant Trump poster on the wall, and it brings a lot of different comments from people, you know, and you'd think like, oh, the gun community, everybody would love Trump, and it's like, no, there's a lot of people that don't like him, and I always joke with them because, you know, when I voted for Trump, I knew who I was voting for. I don't like the guy. To some degree, like he can say a lot of things that can rub people the wrong way. But I voted for him knowing that out of the two, what was going to be the best for this country. And I think a lot of things you're seeing right now, that shaker and mover kind of mentality, for a lot of people, they don't like it, but it gets things done. And I think this time around, you're going to see more of that because he has nothing to lose. He can't be reelected, you know what I mean? So he's going to go out with a blaze of glory, doing everything he can to, you know, do what he does, which is boost Trump and make you say his name and make him in the headlines. So,
Yeah,
you know.
no, definitely. And I think this is where, you know, certainly you and I disagree.
Yeah.
You know, obviously, I will say that I respect your choice and all. And I mean, obviously, it wasn't by far any majority. It was a good amount of people to get the electoral vote. So we can't say that most of America feels the same way, and that's where I think you have this split division between your Democrats and your Republicans. But again, obviously it's happened. We have to accept it and move on. There's a lot of stuff that's moving and shaking at the moment. And to your point, you know, as soon as he came in, you know, obviously the stock markets reacted a certain way. There was a meme coin that was released. That's the Trump coin, is that correct?
Oh, yeah.
And that seemed to gain some momentum early on.
Yeah.
But like anything else, you know, if they're speculative, you know, they tend to get their highs and then they come back to reality.
Yeah.
And maybe with time, that'll gain some traction. I mean, again, a lot of the times when these coins come out, obviously they're released to the public, and you know, people are very hyped up, and then they come back down, and then slowly they start creeping back up. Well, let's hope that during his presidency that meme coin gets up there.
Yeah.
And there's quite, I mean, we talk about this tokenization, and it's happening right now where, you know, Wall Street may just start going into that sector, right?
Yeah.
With the blockchain technology. That seems to be the next move here. and a lot of talk about BlackRock's CEO Larry Fink moving in that direction.
Yeah.
So what does that mean, right? I mean, what does that mean financially for folks that are thinking about the tokenization? The first thing that I talk about that came to mind is, wow, it's going to be a digital world moving forward, you know, a cashless world moving forward, and that's kind of what I see with how they're going to tokenize these investments and all this money that's out there, right? So something to consider. But again, this year, obviously, tax changes. You know, there may be some proposals coming on. I know there's the initial tax act that Trump put in place back in 2017 is set to expire this year. So obviously his cabinet is probably working on the next set of tax changes that could happen.
Yeah.
You know, I've heard some changes to come across. Again, hasn't been enacted yet, but I'm sure it'll come down the way. Folks talking about, well, maybe it's going to be more assistance to already the elite that's out there. You saw him at his inauguration, how many people were supporting him. A lot of the tech world, very high, you know, very big billionaires out there, right? So you kind of think, is our political system now, you know, bid to the highest bidder? I mean, is it one of those where you can pay to play so much politics?
So tax is always fun. So I remember when I was it was my early 20s. So one of my cousin's older friends, he would come around his shop and he was always spitting about this idea that you don't have to pay your taxes. And I'm sure a quick Google search, you can look up this. There's a specific line in the tax code, and he said that if you file this paperwork, you don't have to pay any taxes whatsoever. And of course, you know, we're always like, that's not true. That can't be. But IRS is going to be coming after you. He was dead serious. He said, look, if you read the tax code and the way the Constitution was, you know, made, is basically like taxes can only be collected if you do any business in foreign trade. So we'd always ask him, so do you buy anything from out of the country? And we'd say no. He said, you don't have to file your taxes. So it always, you know, trying to bring that and trying to move forward with that, it gets your head thinking like, well, why do I pay taxes? And you know, I don't really always agree with where my taxes are going, you know. So where that comes back around is anytime you get like a president like this that starts talking about tax cuts, I mean, at the end of the day, you're always like, well, heck yeah, I'd be in favor of that. If I can get a bigger check, I would love that. And I think when I look at like my employees, especially anybody who gets their first job, their first thing, they look at that check and they see all the tax deductions that go into it. And, you know, and it's their first wake-up call to how society works, which is you work your butt off and the government takes a portion of that and they do whatever they want with it. You have really no say at some degree, and you just kind of go about it, you know. So that's where it's tough. You know, I know at the core, as soon as you say taxes, there's a whole moving engine going that society runs on, especially in our government, that how we help with like social projects and stuff that we've always talked about. So I know there is a component necessary because, you know, our schools and transit and all these things, our roads require some kind of taxation to kind of keep moving. But how much and I guess to what degree they tax us, it's always nice to kind of hear that there's a break, you know.
Yeah. And over the years and over the decades, I know that those brackets have changed for some of the you know, wealthier Americans, right? And this isn't an attack on anybody that's wealthy or anything, but at some point, I think, you know, you had tax brackets that reached up in the numbers of over 70%, right? And that's
they don't pay that. That's the problem with I hate that number. You can tell me they're taxed 37% or whatever, you know, 22%, but they don't pay that.
Yeah, I know they don't, but the brackets were there, right? And maybe that was something that we aren't aware of how those loopholes came across.
Sure.
But I'm assuming that if you have that kind of money, then you're going to do everything you can to shelter that or find investments or credits or tax credits that can help you alleviate from you paying that amount. Because no sensible business or anyone that's in business can make it happen if they're paying that much, right? And I understand. I mean, obviously, these folks are the ones that are creating jobs. So one of the initiatives, of course, with these tariffs that you're hearing from Trump is, well, you come and build it here, and you won't get hit with any tariffs.
Yeah.
You come build it here. And again, that's the initiative to try to get more of these corporations to come and stay and build here in America, right? And that's a great initiative because I think in a way that certainly helps with our jobs. Another component of that is, like you said, in many cases you start thinking, why is it that I have to pay taxes? And you start looking at that dollar and you start saying, wow, out of this dollar, this is how much I have to pay in taxes.
Yeah.
And where does that money go, right? And in the federal sense, I mean, we're always looking at spending for like your biggest entitlements that we have, right? Defense spending, you have Social Security, Medicare, and social programs. And those are probably your three biggest ones that I just named there, which was your defense spending, Social Security, and Medicare. And those are at the very top of the list where, there's been conversation of maybe making some cuts. So if you were president for a day, or let's say, Rohi, where would you start the cuts at? And what's the rationale behind that thought process? Because a lot of Americans are certainly unaware of what may take place, especially with Social Security and Medicare, because these have been conversations. Yes, we understand that they may be unfunded at some point in the future, so there's something that's got to be done. But if you have these three major entitlements with federal dollars that we spend on, where would you see that spending or that cut spending?
I would say, and I think this is where you would probably see the things starting to change. I would say if you took the approach, and first off, when the super rich, who are at this point a lot of your politicians, recommend for taxing the rich, who in their right mind says, I make a lot of money, I want you to take it away from me? Nobody. And I know most people realize that, like that they keep saying tax the rich, and it gets the little guy saying, yeah, tax the guy, he's got all this money. I think if you were to say no more tax cuts after a certain bracket, like after you make $500,000 a year, no deductions, I think you would see policy change real quick to stop like escalating that bracket, right? Because again, if I can't get a tax deduction and you're actually paying that 20, 30, 40% tax, I don't think you're going to be voting for the next tax increase. The other thing is, if it was at a tax deduction, the true tax deduction always should go to the lower guy. Like there's a whole political movement that says we need to help the little guy. We need to help this person. Like when we're looking at these early tax brackets, the guy making $0 to $50,000 a year right now, why are we taxing this guy at all? I mean, we've gone over at one of our episodes talking about how much it costs just in Madera for the average person to pay rent, car, gas, food, right? So that means at the end of the day, why are you taxing them at all? They can barely survive right now. So if it's really truly to help those in need, I think the tax bracket should almost be 0 for the lower end. And again, how do you make that up? Well, you're only taxing 12% at this point at $47,000. That guy that's got $500,000, that's only 1% increase. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So you could easily make it up on the other side of the bracket. But I think the real true answer to that is cutting down, especially the corporate taxes and some of these other tax breaks that are given, because then these numbers don't make sense. Or have a cap that says you can have a tax deduction, but you're going to still pay a certain amount of taxes. It's always got to be this amount is what you're going to pay. You may pay more if you don't have those deductions that you're finding, but there's a base. You can't go below that. You cannot not pay taxes.
Yeah.
Because again, Trump was good about that. He boasted about that, how he knew how to leverage the tax, system, basically with real estate and real estate was a devaluation or however they do it, and paid no taxes. Is he genius? Yeah, he worked the system. Can I do that? Not really. Not at my level,
So I want to go back to that question, and I understand you gave me a big answer.
I'm becoming a politician.
Not even a weekend, and you're already starting to dodge the question. So, no. But going back to the question, obviously these are probably the biggest sources of government spending that we do, right? And we want to think that a lot of this money that we pay in taxes is to pay for some of these specific programs, right, or entitlements. But we also have a debt service that we're paying, right? And a lot of that money, a good portion of that money, I think the last time they reported on that was well over $1 trillion, getting close to $2 trillion in debt service.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a lot of money. So, and that's because we continue to lift that debt ceiling.
Yeah.
Because every year, with the cost of inflation, with the cost of doing business, the government has to fund a lot of these programs.
Yeah.
And when they're funding these programs, obviously they're having to borrow money over and over, again, selling bonds and what have you. So the Federal Reserve will say, well, here, let me give you a check in the amount of what you're asking for in return. This is what you're going to pay back, promise to pay.
Sure.
But they have really no money in a sense in their vaults, right? Other than, hey, here, I'm just going to print out all this money. So then the Treasury then goes out, flushes the economy with all this money to fund certain programs. Because again, politicians' task is to try to get money for their respective constituents, right? And a lot of the times, a lot of that funding, whether it's Medicare, Social Security, food stamps or what have you, child nutrition, USDA, you'd be surprised how much social welfare is out there. But it's a safety net for a lot of these folks and businesses. And I call them businesses because businesses too get a lot of the social welfare. They just don't like to call it welfare. When they think of welfare, they think of the poorest people. But you'd be surprised how many people that are very wealthy still qualify for a lot of these social safety nets. And that, in a sense, it accrues a lot of money, a lot of spending. So I know that our defense, for example, that's a lot of money. And one of the initiatives that Trump passed is, hey, NATO, maybe it's time for you to pay 2%, 5%. And this way, we're not having to cover the full amount for defense spending, right? We do have bases just about everywhere in the world. And you can imagine how much money that costs to keep us safe, right? Well, it may be keeping us safe outside the borders, but inside, you're seeing that there's a big cultural shift now and economic shift where the disparities between the wealthy and the poorest are starting to get pretty big.
Yeah.
And you have to wonder, well, shoot, I mean, here we are trying to cut a lot of these very critical programs that help alleviate some of these lower class, and we'll go over those tax brackets in a bit, but the majority of people fall within those brackets because that's where the majority of people are. And the people that are having to pay for that, I think when it comes to taxes, are going to be your middle class, your lower to middle and higher end middle class. I don't even know what the middle class is anymore, really, to be honest with you. What income you have to earn to be considered a middle class. I know it's a lot higher because to buy a home today, the average home in America, you have to earn about $115,000 a year just to be able to afford that. Now, you tell me, I mean, we can look around within the 25-mile radius if that applies to us. Certain pockets maybe, but not the majority of the people, at least not 80% of the people. So, and that's kind of, so I'm not going to dodge the question either. I would say, with the critical programs like Social Security and Medicare, do they need reform? To some extent, yes. Do I cut them and hurt the people that it mostly helps? I wouldn't do that. And when it comes to our defense, I would certainly look at that because with the defense comes a lot of contracts. And a lot of the contracts, you know how government is. Government will pay a lot of money, a certain wage or whatever the case may be. And I appreciate the Department of Government Oversight. Is that what it's called?
Yeah.
Or
the
DOGE?
efficiency.
Efficiency, thank you. And I just don't like it where it's super extreme and you're trying to, take that Band-Aid off really quick. I think you do it gradually and you start initiating some of these systems. But man, that's a lot of cuts that you're going to do that are going to hurt the majority of your people.
Well, I think, and I was going to see if I can bring the chart up. So I think when you look at, because you brought up the coins and all this stuff, if you really want to, push us into the future of where we need to be as a society, as a government, I can tell you that, cash is dying. And it's not because I want it to die. It's because it's becoming more and more difficult to use it in your daily activity. Because it wasn't, too long ago that you could pay the same, with cash or card anywhere you went. When we went for our training, we started going to shops that were card only, no cash. There was a Starbucks, no cash, card only. You know, there's two issues with that. You have to accept my legal tender. It is the law. So I'm still waiting for that multi-million-dollar lawsuit to go after them and say, here's my $10, I want my coffee, and let them say no. But it made it difficult because even though I had money in my pocket, cash, I was forced to use my card. So that shove to a digital society is already there. Now, when you say, like, how does the government become more responsible? Well, this is where you can kind of appreciate this idea of a government coin, in the sense of, most of these new coins, the coins that are out, you can do things called staking, which is you stake it, meaning that I'm not going to have it in an easy way to remove it, and I gain interest on that coin. It's no different than when we talk about buying bonds, right? So instead of having these individual entities of a treasury and a bond and all these different things, it would just simply be like, I'm going to stake my money into this thing. You're going to give me interest, and I'm leaving my money for to use it. It's no different than somewhat the system we have now, but it's as easy as doing it on my phone in 2 seconds and seeing my rate of return. So I can agree to some point where this digital currency and where we may be able to take it is going. What I don't like is, just like my card, is if my card was compromised today and all of a sudden I can't use it, I can't survive. I can't buy anything. I can't go anywhere. I don't know if you've ever been a victim of having your cards compromised. For me, it used to be every 6 months. I'd get that notification, if there's been purchases and your card's canceled and they're sending you one in the mail. Well, now what do I do?
Yeah.
I can't make purchases. I can't do anything. So that's where that digital side comes into play, and I say, no. There's got to be a fallback. There's always got to be some other system, and it's going to be cash. It's going to be something I can hold on to.
And I agree with that, because in many cases, if you go back to looking at the gold standard, for example, and people felt comfortable in knowing that legal tender, you couldn't carry gold around, right? So you couldn't really carry the metals that supported the currency at the moment, right? So once the initiation of a note or a check came out, the bank says, well, we'll hold it here, but meanwhile, this is a check that you can write, or a note that you can write to spend based on the balance that you have, right?
Yeah.
And then came along currency that we've had for currencies have been around for many, many years, right? And this is no different. We call it a fiat currency because it's fiat. It's made out of paper and it's sustained by the confidence. We no longer have...
Let's call it toilet paper.
Toilet paper. You can call it whatever you want, but it's the confidence of the American people that keep it there, because it's really not backed by gold as it was at one time.
Yeah.
But it allows us to utilize these papers in exchange for services and or goods. Now, it would be difficult for me to carry these gold coins or silver coins to be able to make exchanges, right? Because then how would they weigh what they owe me, right? They have to have a system that would say, well, I have some dust in grams for you, and your... So the dollars became easier and as an exchange and being able to trade those, right?
Yeah.
But now the digital world is here, and that seems to be easier in providing a good or a service in our current world. To your point, what happens if things shut down and I no longer can use that? Well, then you're shit out of luck. But I think the application is useful to an extent. Now, I wouldn't say completely digital. I would agree that you definitely want to have some type of hard asset that it's tangible, that you can exchange in a case where everything freezes. And all of a sudden you can't go buy that Starbucks. Well, now what is that attendant in Starbucks going to do to trade you that coffee? What can you bring? Your Rolex, your watch, or something, right? I mean, you'd be surprised. But if we had another medium of exchange that we can utilize, in this case, the paper dollars, I too am a big fan of that. But I'm starting to see that I'm saving them more because I only want to use them where I know that they may not accept a card, but now it's easy to pay with Apple Pay, Venmo, Zelle, your everything that you have. You can even use your digital coins, your crypto, to buy and exchange for goods and services. But I think it's your government wanting to oversee everything. You could imagine how much cash is out there that probably doesn't go through the tax code. It doesn't go through the IRS, right? And I'm sure there's quite a bit. So tightening that up through a digital format would probably be, if I'm the government, right? If I'm on the government and I want to oversee everybody's transactions so that I know what to tax you, then that would be my push to do that, right? Again,
Yeah.
I am not the government, and I'm against that too much government oversight, because in some ways, people should have the right to have that other medium of exchange that could be, I don't know, people like to barter cash or
Yeah.
whatever you want to call it.
I was
right?
trying to find the episode number, but South Park, I don't know if you watched it or not. South Park had an episode on it on this whole thing, and it was funny because when he started talking about it, it brought to mind it, and it's what it is that they're trying to basically buck the system, and they started at the end talking about how they're going to have bread, but we're gonna trade, and I'm gonna trade a certain amount of loaves for this, and they start talking about the complications of that, how markets fluctuate too much. So my cost of my bread versus your cost of rice today may be a little higher, maybe a little lower, and it becomes kind of difficult. And this is where you start getting to currency, because currency, to some point, it just stays flat. So if today I want $2 for my bread, you just give me $2, but I don't have to figure out, well, it's a loaf and a half, or it's going to cost you a chicken and 2 eggs to buy. You know what I mean? Like it's this unification of just it's a dollar. Why I say it's funny, because you get into this thing where we always talk about long-term assets. So let's say you bought, or you had a $20 bill from the 1920s, right? And they always talk about how people used to stick it in jars, and and now they find the $20 and it's like, well, I found $20, but do you know what $20 bought you back then? It bought you so much more. And that's where they get those calculations of $20 then was like $1,000 today, right? You have this because of inflation. So what I always say that is because people will say things like, oh, buy like a classic car, because in 20 years from now, it'll appreciate and you'll have so much more money. And you go, well, is that true? If I buy that classic car, let's say in the 60s for $5,000 and I'm selling it for $50,000, did I really make $45,000? No, you didn't. It appreciated, hopefully, at the rate of inflation. Plus, you had tags, you had gas, you had maintenance, you had all these things that went into it. You probably lost money, or at best, maybe broke even, right? So you get into these things where I think the public have a delusion of what is making money and what is actually just keeping up with inflation.
Yeah, and that's a good point, because these particular assets, like we talk about vehicles, houses, and even gold, and to some extent, most of those are what I call just a store of value. Mm-hmm. What that value was at that time when you purchased that,
Correct.
right? So at the time, if you purchased gold, for example, when it was $35 an ounce, and today it's closer to $2,800 an ounce. Mm-hmm. Well, again, that was the value of what $35 could buy you back then.
Yeah.
Today, with inflation the way it is, that's the amount of what that value back then could buy you today. And that's all it is. You're not making money, you're preserving the value of it based on what it was back then. So people don't understand that inflation is a secret tax. Mm-hmm. And that's what it is. You're getting taxed. Your money right now at the rate that it's going today with inflation is deteriorating by the minute if it's just sitting there. Mm-hmm. And this is what inflation does to currencies, because it's not backed by anything other than the confidence and the manipulation of where the Feds can do, right? They can increase the supply, or they can decrease the supply. And that creates, again, inflation. And with inflation, the value of your money. So therefore, you're going to need more of those dollars to buy that Big Mac now. When back then, you could buy a Big Mac for as much as a quarter, 50 cents. I remember in the 90s, it was $1. I could buy a Big Mac for $1. That was their promotion.
And it was big.
And it was big. Now, I don't know what's happened, but I know I didn't get bigger. I used to weigh more back then, but I remember that them Big Macs were a little bit bigger. Now, they seem like they're really small. And I mean, this is a genius of corporate...
shrinkflation, that's called shrinkflation, yeah.
And you wouldn't realize it, but man, for 99 cents, you could buy 2 Big Macs at that. After I finished that Big Mac, that second one was already like, you know what, I'm not going to finish it. Now, I can probably eat 3 of those. But again, that's the power of your money that's deteriorating the value of it. And not a lot of people know that. So if you have money saved up, you can save up piles of it. Unless you're earning some interest to keep up with inflation, I hate to say this, your money's going to deteriorate in value. Essentially, it'll just, the banks are utilizing it. That's the purpose of it. You leave it there. I then lend it to a 7-8%, but they want to give you a measly 1%, 2%. Now that's a genius of making business. So if you ever want to get into a business, there's nothing like lending money. What's the word that they call it? There's a term that they call lending money, and it's something that Christianity always was against. But it was, or even in the Muslim community, I don't think you can really lend money with interest.
Correct.
I forget the term, but if it comes to me, I'll make sure we put it up.
Yeah.
Rohi, can we go back to that tax bracket? I wanted to show.
There,
yes, thank you. I wanted to show our viewers today what this means as far as your tax bracket, right? So first of all, you have to know that when you're preparing your taxes and you're doing your taxes, the IRS is going to give you a standard deduction already, unless you itemize. And the difference between those two is the IRS will come up with a number every year, again, with the cost of living adjustment. They'll add a bit more for if you're single, if you're married filing joint, if you're a head of household, or if you're a widow. But they have these standard rates or standard deductions that they give you as a tax filer. Whichever category you fall under, that is the standard deduction they'll give you. Now, if you're someone that wants to itemize, and what does that mean? Well, then I'm going to list my own deductions. But you have to list the deductions based on their categories that they have, right? Like medical expenses, they have your state and local taxes, they have mortgage interest, they have charitable contributions, which are some of the biggest ones, and then theft and losses, right? So if you add all those up and they exceed the standard deduction that the IRS is giving you, or their defaulted deduction, then you use the long form. A lot of people don't understand that, and they always ask me every year. By the way, I'm also a certified tax preparer. I've been doing this for over 15 years. So if you guys are in tax season mode and you need to find one, come see me. I'd be more than happy to help you with that service. But anyhow, going back to that deduction, so you can take someone that maybe earns $30,000, right, for that matter, and you say, well, I'm going to pay tax on 30. No, you're going to pay taxes on $30,000 minus your standard deduction. So if you're a single person and you deduct the standard deduction for that single person, which is $14,600, you now have to pay taxes on the remaining, and that remaining amount is what do you got there?
Oh, $15,400.
$15,400. So that's what you would pay. Now in this bracket, then you would see the amount there that if you were single, you're over the. If you're a single person, you would pay 12%. Anything above $11,601 to $47,000, you're at a 12% bracket. So when you look at that, and you want to know, what am I going to pay? And again, we're taking the assumption that you're a single person, there is no credits, you have nothing else other than the standard deduction, you're left with the $15,400, this is your tax bracket. Now, we get into where the reality is at, right? The married filing joint. And typically those folks are paying anywhere between the 22%. I mean, that's a 10% increase for a lot of folks. So you got to look at it this way. That's only your federal income taxes. On the state side, you may be paying another additional 10%. Not to leave out any of your local income taxes.
Yeah.
So by the time that dollar, if you break it down, you're looking anywhere between 30 to 40% if you're earning between $94,000 to $201,000. That's going to be the majority of people working together in a household earning more than $94,000. But man, that's crazy. You think about it, and for the corporate tax can be in the tune of 10 to 11%. In cases they don't pay taxes, because if you're self-employed, Rohi, you can deduct a lot of that money, and people don't know that, and that's the power of being self-employed or having a business. And I'm not saying just a Schedule C. I'm talking about someone that has a corporation, an S corp. Again, services that I can assist you with. I'm not trying to push myself on this business, but I'm trying to tell you this is what really takes place. If you're an employee, a wage earner, you're subject to these tax brackets, and it's very, very hard for you to get any other deductions other than what they give you there.
Yeah.
So where are the breaks for the middle class?
Well, and it's, I'm laughing as I'm looking at these numbers because it's really hitting me. Because why are we taxing somebody 10% who makes $0? Why is that even there? So that means I make my first dollar and you're already taking 10 cents out of my dollar. We go back to, like I said, we want to help people. We talk about homelessness. We talk about people getting, like, just bringing themselves up. And we're talking about people who, a single person making up to $11,000, and you're still taking $1,000 out of their paycheck.
Correct.
Like, that's the difference between making rent, maybe buying a new car, maybe filling up their tank of gas. It goes back to saying getting that $1,000 from somebody who has nothing to getting $1,000 it's a small percentage of these elitists that are making 500 or 500,000 or millions, right? You're talking about like a small fraction of them. But we're taking it from this guy who's barely surviving.
And I don't want to come across as a liberal leftist, but you got to look at it this way. You got to look at, let's just say there are these employees at work, and I'm not going to mention any stores because certainly we don't want this show to be attacked by them. But let's just say that someone out there earning the minimum wage. By the way, the federal poverty line is somewhere in the 14,000 to 15,000. I mean, I don't think that's even. I think that's way out of whack.
Yeah.
Because the new federal poverty line is somewhere in the tune of over $30,000. People making $30,000 are just, you look at it, $30,000, Rohim, and you got to think that if I'm getting taxed at a 10%, well, after deduction, a good portion of that money, maybe $1,500, and then let's just say that a good portion of that $30,000, let's say $4,000 of that goes into your taxes, right? And after that, I mean, you're left with housing. There's no way in today's world that housing in the tune of $1,500 to $2,000 a month, you're going to survive with that income. There's just no way.
Yeah.
There's just no way. And I think we've gone so far away from the fundamentals of what the reality is.
Yeah.
The cost of living and wages. Where are we at? I mean, think about it. Are we way that off? And it's really hard to fathom the idea that the disparity between that is like a corporate CEO can earn over 300 to 500 times that person's income. I mean, I get it. That's opportunity. That's America for you.
Sure.
But you got to believe that at some point, if you have that mentality, you're going to have some type of revolution, some type of rebellion over that, because essentially that's not sustainable. That isn't sustainable, because if you're making that amount of money, all that's saying is you're extracting that from someone. It's from the labor.
Yeah.
How else can you get that kind of money if you're selling maybe a product, a service, or you're speculating? But most of the time, it's because you have people that are working, barely making it, just barely above the poverty line. But yet you can walk away with 200-300 times that salary. It's just hard for me to fathom that. And this is where you get a lot of these folks. I mean, and maybe they don't see it that way. But once you put the numbers and you put pen to paper and you start looking at these at the data, then it's shocking. It's shocking to see that. And no matter what's out there, what videos or what social media outlets are utilizing to convince you otherwise, I mean, it's sad.
Well, and the thing is that, I mean, let's say you had a thing where we had a zero tax rate on this first bracket, the 0 to 11,000 single. It's not that you wouldn't capture that tax. They're going to go spend their money. They're going to buy gas. They're going to buy a TV. They're going to they have their car. That money is going to be spent. I don't think they're going to hoard it and not go back into the system. So to think it's going to go uncaptured, it's not. It's just going to be maybe instead of 10% going to the feds, it's going to be baked into that sales tax. So maybe there's a sales tax adjustment that kind of helps rebalance everything. But in any of these brackets, you're spending that money. So it's going to get into the system. It's going to get taxed somehow. There's nothing that we have that's untaxed.
Yeah, and again, we gave you an example of a single, again, that didn't have any other credits.
Yeah.
There are credits out there for like earned income credit. There's child tax credit. There's credits out there that are going to help. This example was specifically on that single person that doesn't qualify for any of these credits, right? But you start getting into a married couple that has 2 to 3 kids, then obviously now you have child tax credit. additional child tax credit that pays for a lot of that liability, and most of that money does come back. But there's certain, obviously, this starts phasing out after a certain amount of income. And I still think that threshold needs to be higher, because a lot of these folks are struggling, especially if you have a family of 3. Yes, they may give you the maximum, but man, you'd be surprised how many people already need that money. You'd be surprised. This is why when there's tax services out there, they offer these, what they call these refund anticipation loans. It's not your refund.
I know.
And as much as I want to help people that way, because I know I would create more business that way. I know I just have to solicit for it. But you know what, Rohi? I can't see myself to go through that as it is.
Yeah.
It's very difficult. So I try to keep my prices very competitive so that I don't have to have me go offer you something like this, because it comes with interest. There is there's
That's what your
financing.
competitor, the green and black symbol
You're
guys.
you're financing that refund,
Yeah.
and in return you're paying a hefty fee to make sure that you get that money early. And you can't wait a week. You can't wait 2 weeks. You need it like yesterday. And like you said, that money that they're going to get, it's not going to be saved. The majority of people cannot
That's
save
when our
that
business
money.
booms. Like
Yes. So you have to depend
Yeah.
on those folks to go spend that money within the first 3-4 months of the year. And a lot of the times they do. Now, during the COVID, they had nowhere to spend it. So they stored all this money, and they gave you all this money. So you can only imagine. We talked about currency, right? We talked about, well, shit, now we're going to inflate our market. We're gonna bring in more dollars in circulation. And we were waiting for it. We had almost a year, 2 years of just saving and storing and hoarding, and all of a sudden we opened the gates, and here we go. There goes this frenzy, and before you know it, we had supply chain issues. We can't keep up, and then we saw growth in a lot of the sales tax revenues.
But that was the disappointing part of when they started doing that, is because it was pitched as help the person on their rent, help them with their car payment, help them with their financial needs because they lost their job due to COVID. And you go, yeah, I mean, come on, let's help help the little guy. But it was unrestricted. It's here, Jose, you're not usually financially smart with your money, but we're going to give you $1,000 for your rent. Make sure you use it on your rent. And like you said, nobody did that. Nobody used it to get ahead. They went and they blew it on their big screen TV, or they came and bought a gun from us, or they spent it.
And you know, you're right, because it was mainly a one-time deal. So, I mean, think about it. When they give you a stimulus for $600, then they give you a $1,400, and I think they gave you another one for, and this is for each person, right? They start off at $600, they went off to $1,200, and I think $1,400. There may be another one. There was talks that there may be other stimulus, but think about it. People didn't. It wasn't routine.
Sure.
And unless you were getting that child tax credit or that advancement of it, I mean, it was good. You were spending it on things that you did need, but you couldn't spend it because there was nothing open to spend it on.
Yeah.
All you could do is save it, and as soon as that thing opened, so now that little period made Americans feel like, you know what? Okay, at least I have something to protect me, something to back me. But now we're back to reality. And it's worse than it was pre-pandemic.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm not a big fan of the universal basic income. I wasn't, but you know what? At some point, I mean, you're doing it already with Social Security. You do it in these safety nets.
Yeah.
I mean, it's tough, you know, and unless you can provide some safety net for a lot of Americans, you're going to see this cultural revolution on what's taking place today. And it's just, looking at the statistics for even for real estate, only about 6% of first-time buyers are engaging in buying a home. 6%, compared to, you know, maybe 30% back in the prior to the big recession. You know, there was a big hype, and even after, of first-time home buyers getting out there and wanting to buy, because it made sense for them to buy after the crisis, because homes were cheap. I can get into these homes. I can make it happen.
Yeah.
Now the majority of your buyers, at least 62%, are married couples, and the average age is up in between 45 to 50. So yes, there is unmarried couples that are buying. That's a pretty large percentage too. But it's not as it was before. There's a dynamic shift there that's taking place of who's buying these homes, and it's not your first-time buyers. It's not your younger generation. So there's a lot of exchanges taking place now because they want to upgrade. There's a need. There's divorces. There's something going on there. But, you know, you would think that we were going in the right direction. And now we're getting so far away from the fundamentals of like saying affordability. And that's so far spread that I think it's hard for these people to say, "Oh, man, I just can't." And they're starting to say that I can't afford it.
Yeah.
It's unaffordable. It's unattainable now.
Yeah.
And that's sad. That's sad, because if we have that, then there's got to be a change in some way, whether it's culturally, people just saying, you know what, screw that. Not wanting to pay their mortgage, not wanting to pay the rent. That could happen, Roy.
Yeah.
That could happen. So I know we beat the hell out of this here.
Yeah.
Again, we'll go ahead and show you the tax bracket once more. If you guys are in the market for any safety firearms and what have you, especially during this time, come see Rohi
Yeah.
at Sax Guns here in Madera. Again, want to congratulate you, Rohi.
Thank you.
And again, if you guys are in the tax season, wanting to get those prepared, come and see me. I'd love to help you guys out, especially if you're here locally in Madera. Other than that, I think we're going to go ahead and call this a thank you for watching.